Howdy coders, if you are running Node in Docker for development, then no doubt that you have run into the issue of how to restart Node automatically, keep your files up to date, rebuild if necessary, both your source code and rebuild the Docker image, and how to make that all have really nice feeling development ergonomics so that Node and Docker aren't tripping you up for development. There are a few solutions to that, and in fact, I have presented one of them in my Ultimate Node Docker, Ultimate Node Stack video that I've done in the past. And oftentimes what people will do is sync the volumes between Docker and your local machine and run some sort of watch process. So in this blog post that I have, I go through this to where if you can have a VS Code extension, watch files, and restart the container for you, or you could have a script that's watching the process and restart it for you. But that's just kind of an extra layer and an extra step. Well, it turns out in late 2023, Docker announced and released to general availability Docker Compose Watch, which has a built-in watching mechanism in Docker Compose that has some pretty interesting features. So in this video, I'm going to walk through what this is, how to use it, and we'll code this up from scratch and take a look at an example. So if we go to the docs for Docker Compose Watch, we can peruse through what this actually means. So they have a few different options. First off is a high-level view. Docker Compose Watch watches your local file system for changes. So if you're changing source code, if you're changing in Node, for instance, your package.json or your pnpm lock file, things like that, then you can trigger certain Docker actions to occur. So one is just a sync action. And you might wonder, like, what is the difference between this and mapping the volumes together to where your local machine volume maps into your Docker container volume? Well, there is actually a big difference in this. If you try to use nodemon in Docker before, which nodemon is probably the most popular way to watch a node service and restart it on changes. This gets tricky in Docker because of how the file system events work if you have those linked volumes. And you have to use either a legacy flag, or you do have to use a legacy flag, which monitors each file manually. It gets really messy. Nodemon is not recommended in Docker, unless you're using Docker Compose Watch. So with this sync action in Docker Compose Watch, then it triggers the proper file system events that nodemon can pick up on. So that's what we're going to use in our example. Another cool thing here is rebuild. So oftentimes when you're building a Docker image or building your Docker container, you're doing that every time you might add or remove packages, change up how scripts are in your package.json. So you tend to rebuild Docker containers before. And again, in my Ultimate Node Stack series, I have a section where I kind of put some helper commands in there to easily rebuild this when you need to. But if it could rebuild automatically, that'd be really great. So if we scroll down in the docs here, we can see what an example of this looks like. So this goes in your Docker Compose file, and underneath a service, it's a little buried here. It's underneath a develop key and then underneath a watch key. And then you can pass an array of actions here. So in their example here, which is node-based, they're saying that anytime the path web changes on my local machine, sync that into the source web directory, and we can see by the sync action here. And it's ignoring any node modules files. So in this case, if this container had, say, nodemon running, and it was watching this source web directory, then the proper file system events would happen and nodemon would be able to restart that inside the Docker container without restarting the Docker container itself, which is pretty cool. Also, we have a rebuild action here. So if you change your package.json, you might want to include like a lock file in here as well. Then it will automatically rebuild and then restart your container in Docker Compose. So that is pretty cool. Let's run through an example of using this from scratch and see how smoothed out we can get the development ergonomics. So I'm going to start just from scratch here. So I'm going to make a directory and we're going to call this watch demo. So I'm going to go into this directory and I'm going to just say pnpm init so we can initialize a package.json file and then finally open this up in VS Code. Now, it's not really required for this demo, but of course I like using TypeScript and it will give us a nice build step to work with as well. So let me go ahead and create a file. I'm going to call this source/index.ts. And for now, we're just going to say console.log hello world. Now we need some sort of way to build this. So I'm going to just head on over to the SWC compiler that I often use. And we'll do this here. So I'm going to install our SWC packages. I'm not going to put those in development mode. I'm just going to put those in our regular dependencies. So what I should be able to do with SWC here is point it to a directory and give it an output directory. They give you a couple of different options here. This is the one I like using in particular. So let's open up package.json and I'm going to create a build script and say watch the source directory and output it to the dist directory. Whoops. There we go. So if I run pnpm build, then it has compiled this file. If I go to the dist directory, then I have an index.js, which happens to match TypeScript for now, but it has compiled successfully our console.log to the terminal. So that's pretty nice. Let's get this running in Docker and see this execute actually in a Docker container. Since I'm using pnpm here, I want to make sure that that's available to me in Docker. And I've noticed recently that, I'm sure I've noticed this before, but I remembered recently that pnpm has this really great page, just pnpm.io/docker. And they give you exactly the 2 steps that you need to get this running really nicely with pnpm in Docker. First is having a good Docker ignore file, which is something you never want to ignore. So we'll do .docker ignore and paste in this. This just means whenever we're creating a Docker container, anytime we're copying files over, don't copy the node modules or git directory or git ignore file, any markdown files, the dist directory for build. So this is actually a really great starter. I have no edits here. No edits. Next thing is a Dockerfile, and theirs is a bit advanced here, so if you don't understand all of this, don't worry about it. But it looks like they've taken some efficiencies here in making this really nice. So I'm going to copy this in, create a Dockerfile, and paste this in here. And for right now, I don't believe that we'll have any edits to this. As of this recording, we're on Node 20 for the latest long-term support version of Node, so we will stick with that. Next up, we'll want a compose file. So I'm going to go in here and create a new file, docker-compose.yaml, and we're going to create a services key. I usually call mine backend, so we'll create backend. I want to build the local directory, so that will look into the local directory for that Docker file that we just created. We are going to eventually want a port, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this in as port 3000. And for right now, that's it. We're not going to add the watch stuff yet. I just want to see this start up. That is my goal. Now, when we start this up, we can see in our Dockerfile that it's running a pnpm start. I know that's not going to work because we don't have a pnpm start script. But we also have this build step as well. So let's go ahead and add a start script as if this were already built. So if this were built, I'd want to run node dist/index, which is exactly what I want there. But we do want to build this in development as well. So what I'm going to do is add a dev script here. And what this will do is run pnpm build and pnpm start all in one go. So in our Docker compose file, I'm going to override the command to be npm run or pnpm dev. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Let's see if we've forgotten anything. So I'm going to do a docker compose up and see if this works. It's hanging a little bit. Here we go. Okay. Almost there. Let's see. Okay, you know what? I think it is running. Let me trash this. I did some prep on this earlier, and I think it was running on an old directory. So let's try this again. So let me do a docker compose up. I don't think you'll run into that before. Okay, you know what? 1 second. This is using the demo that I had used earlier. So let me go ahead and throw that completely away. Third time's a charm. Again, I don't think you'll run into that locally. Very curious. Let's see here. I really want to. What happened was I called this the same thing, so I think that's what has happened here. I shouldn't have called it the same thing. Maybe I can delete these. In fact, let me just delete all of my images in here because I know I don't need them. Okay, 4th time's a charm. Docker compose up. There we go. So now it's using our Dockerfile to rebuild the image. It has run our pnpm build and pnpm start command. It's run node dist/index, and we've gotten the hello world. So that's good. So we've got node running in Docker, pnpm dependencies installing, our TypeScript building, and a hello world outputting. Now, this has gone ahead and exited because we don't have any long-running processes here. So let's open up our index.ts file and create something long-running in here. And of course, that would be something like a web server. So I'm going to install Express. So pnpm add Express, and then I'll also do pnpm add in dev dependencies, that's the capital D, at types/express, because I happen to know that Express does not come with types. So I'm going to import Express from Express. We're going to create an app. We're going to create a hello world route. Thank you, Copilot, for coding for me today. And we're going to listen to a port. Now, I happen to know also that whenever we're running in Docker, instead of binding to localhost, we need to bind to 0000. So in case you're running things in Docker and things aren't listening to the proper port or you can't connect, it's probably that you need to connect to that host. So this gives us something a bit more that we need to, this gives us a long-running process that will be running in Docker. So right now, if I do just a docker compose up, it's going to run my old code because nothing has rebuilt here. It hasn't detected any changes. I would need to now go in and manually rebuild my container. So I think I can do that. And in fact, if we look at the Docker Compose documentation, they kind of give you an example of for the rebuild action, what this is essentially the same thing as doing is a Docker Compose up build and specifying a service to rebuild. So let me try that by hand right now. So Docker Compose up build, and I'm going to rebuild the backend service. So this will rebuild my whole backend service, which will give us new source code, which this is some heavy lifting here. This is a lot just to change some source files, but we're going to make this a lot simpler. It says I cannot use import statement outside of a module. So let me real quick in our package.json make this of type module. Once again, try to rebuild this again. And there we go. So now we have an Express app running on port 3000. So if I go over to my terminal, I'm going to move this to a different window, and I just do a curl HTTPS or HTTP localhost 3000, then I will get that hello world. Great. Now, what if I said hello world 2? If I save this and I recurl, we're still just getting hello world. For some reason, %sign. But we're still just getting hello world, not hello world 2. And that's because our source isn't updated in the currently running container. So now we've gotten node, docker, pnpm, express in this long-running express process in our Docker Compose file. Excuse me. We haven't even gotten to compose watch yet, but that's where we stand now. We've gotten our baseline ready to go. First, let's demonstrate the rebuilding capabilities of Docker Compose Watch. This is a really handy and interesting one. So if we add a develop key here, and then a watch key inside of that, then I can specify various actions here. Let's go back to the docs and look at their example. So we've got develop, watch, and actions. So like I said, we're going to start with this rebuild action. So every time we change, say, package.json, we might want to rebuild, which is very likely. So let's do that here. Action, rebuild, and then what was that? It was path. Path, package.json. So let's say that I go over to my terminal. In fact, let's do this side by side. Oops. Let's do this side by side. Apparently my 1Password shortcut is the same as my hide the sidebar shortcut here. I want to add a package here. So let's say I'm adding something like I'll frequently bring in Lodash into projects or Luxon or something like that. So let's do pnpm add Lodash. Now, package.json would have updated with this, but nothing has happened in my Docker Compose. That's because we need to use a different command now when we're running Docker Compose. We need to use Docker Compose up. So I'm going to Control-C out of our currently running Docker Compose up and instead use Docker Compose watch. If I use Docker Compose watch, that is going to utilize the watch actions that we've defined here in our Docker Compose file. And by default, whenever you initiate Docker Compose watch, it goes ahead and runs the rebuild actions. So it has happened to rebuild our container for us. Now let's say I've decided I'm not going to use Lodash, so I'm going to do pnpm rm Lodash, which itself will update our package.json file. And we can see that when I do that, it automatically rebuilds our container. Now, one thing I've noticed with this is that it does actually initiate a Docker Compose up in the background, which is really nice, because then you get it in one command. But I don't see the log output of my server. And I use that all the time. I'm really kind of surprised there's not at least a flag to enable seeing the Docker Compose up log output. You'd need to tail the logs or run Docker Compose up in a separate tab. So I'm really kind of surprised about that. Or inversely, I wish there was a way to run Docker Compose up with watch enabled. So far, I haven't seen a way to do this. If you know this, please comment down below because I would love to know that, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to start using Docker Compose up in pretty much all of my projects. But regardless, what we can do is say Docker Compose up here in a different tab, and there's where we can see our log output. So let me open up yet another tab, and let's do something like pnpm add Luxon, because Luxon is a common library that I'll often add. We can see here in our left tab that the container's automatically rebuilding, and we can see here in the right tab, which is trailing that Docker Compose up log output, that our server has restarted because the container itself was rebuilt. So this is really nice. Aside from having two tabs going here with Docker Compose, this is really nice. I like that I can, as a developer, be able to add and remove packages, change up scripts in package.json, and not have to worry about going and manually rebuilding the container. In fact, it helps you build up the rules for when a container needs to be rebuilt instead of just rebuilding it either at random or when things stop working. So really, really nice feature to be able to rebuild on specific file changes. But let's get into the really sexy stuff, which is restarting your server within an existing and already running container, and even rebuilding your source code when needed. So let's do another action here, and that is the sync action. So very similar to what they have here, we want to watch a path, target the copying of those files, and sync those over whenever they change on our local machine, update those within the Docker container. So let's do an action here called sync, and we'll say that was path and target. So our path is we want to watch our local source file, and our target is going to be, let's reference our Dockerfile and see where the pnpm Dockerfile example that we used is putting this. It's putting it in apt / in our case it will be source. So apt / source. So now anytime we update a file within our source directory, then it's going to push that change to the apt / source file. Now right now that's not going to do anything because I don't have anything listening to that. But if we install nodemon, then we can listen to that. So let's install nodemon and kind of see some of these things happen here. So before I added Luxon, I want to remove that. So we're not using Luxon right now. But I do want to use nodemon. So I'm going to do pnpm add nodemon. Stands for node monitor. And because of our watch process, we've already rebuilt our container. So now I have nodemon accessible to me in our container, which is awesome. So now let's create a script that does this for us. So whenever we do our dev script, we have pnpm build and pnpm start here. Let's create a script called, say, watch here. and it looks like it's going to suggest a few things for us, but we'll kind of go along the way here. So nodemon, I want to watch our source directory. That is true. In fact, we'll go with Copilot here. We want to watch our source directory, and then we want to execute pnpm. Let's see. We want to execute pnpm build and pnpm start. That sounds good to me. But we have a couple different adjustments here. So we do want to watch our source directory. We're using TypeScript, so we need to be sure and specify the extension of TypeScript. So that's good here. Now we need to figure out what we're going to run. In fact, this already has pnpm build and pnpm start. So in fact, we're just going to say dev here. Might want to change these around what these are named, but I think that this is good for now. So watch is going to be our nodemon script that watches our source directory every time, including TypeScript files, and every time that happens, executes a pnpm run dev, which will then build and start our server. So we're already in Docker Compose specifying a command here. So instead of pnpm dev, let's do a pnpm watch here. And in that case, I'm going to shut down what I have running in Docker Compose and start those back up because I adjusted this command. All right, so now we have nodemon working. By the way, that's working because, again, nodemon was automatically installed for us by the package rebuild. Oops, it looks like compose watch. There we go. Had to restart that. So nodemon's working. It built our package and started it for us, and it's now listening on port 3000, which is very nice. Okay, so if I go over here and I do curl localhost 3000, I see hello world 2. And if I go change our source to hello world 3 and save that, the nodemon will restart. Now, I saw this in my prep work too. Getting this error that the address or the port is already in use. I'm very curious as to why this is happening. I have a fix for this, and I'm going to give you the fix. But I'm very curious as to why this is happening, and if you know why it's happening, again, please comment down below. But the fix for this was to specify the signal that nodemon is using whenever it is restarting, and in this case, specifying sigterm. I'm very surprised that this doesn't work this way out of the box, or yeah, I'm very surprised this doesn't work out of the box. But if I save this, then it will, let's see, I did adjust package.json, so I would have expected that to rebuild. So it's rebuilding. Yes, okay. If I go here and say hello world 5, then it will do this as well. Okay. So that's interesting too. The other thing that I had in here earlier, it's still doing the same thing, is adding a delay. And in fact, I'm kind of wondering now if that is what fixed it. So we've got our process running again. If I do hello world 6 and save, that is very strange. So I'm still getting error listening on port 3000. That is very odd to me. Let me restart this one more time. I'm a bit surprised. I'm a bit surprised about that. Am I using the right delay flag? Let me just see. So if I go to our documentation, delay, there is a delay, and you can specify it in milliseconds. So I am using the right flag. Let me try this one more time. Maybe I didn't start something in the right order. I'm not sure. I am live here. Okay, so we're running on 3000. I'm going to change this to hello world 7. Hit save. Very strange. Let me do a very large delay. We're going to do a 2-second delay. Change this up again. So this was not happening this severely to me in dev mode. And I'm not sure what the case is here that would have this throwing this kind of error. I'm really not sure. We are using SIGTerm. Yes, watch. Let me do one more thing. Not sure why this would make a difference, but I'm looking back at what I did before. Let me do a pnpm build and a pnpm start here. I'm not sure why that would make a difference, but just to copy my prep work, let's see if we can get this working. So here we go. Hello world 9. And that does work. Curious. I'm not sure what the difference would be there. Instead of doing pnpm dev, which is doing this exact same command, I've done pnpm build and pnpm start. If I take the delay out, now I'm curious. If I take the delay out, I saved this twice, so I'm going to let this rebuild again. And then I go change this to hello world 10. No error. So something about that being one script instead of two, not sure why, is causing some sort of issue here. Curious. If you know what this is, please do comment, because I would like to know. But here we go. So every time our source updates, then our server rebuilds and restarts, but not the container restart. The container doesn't have to restart. Like, that's the beauty of this, is it's all rebuilding and restarting just the node process, not the container. So if I curl this, then we've got hello world 10. If I change this to 11, it very quickly rebuilds and restarts. I mean, that was within, a second or less there. I go curl this and we're getting the updates to our code. So that is pretty nice there. So I'm really liking what Docker Compose Watch has to offer here. It does have a few of the downfalls like I went over. You do have to run the two process, or actually you don't. You only have to run Docker Compose Watch, but you don't see the logs with it. So you do have to run a separate window in order to see the logs. However, I love the built-in capability to rebuild the image on particular file changes like package.json changes. And I do love the ability to resync files into the live running container and have that trigger the proper events that tools like NodeMon can then pick up on and rebuild packages. I suspect, and I think I saw this in the blog post as well, that this helps with hot reloading. So if I was running some sort of React process, something like Next or something like that within the container, then this would enable hot reloading within a Docker container, not just one running from your local machine. So really, really cool here. So check out Docker Compose Watch if you haven't already. It could really level up your development ergonomics for how you use Node inside of Docker. And for me, I know it's going to clean some things up, like relying on VS Code tasks or externally running processes to watch file directories and restart processes. In fact, the things that I was using before was restarting the entire container, which just takes a touch longer than restarting the process within the container. So check that out. Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time. Have a great one.